do you believe that vivisection or any other form of animal experimentation, even for health and vaccine research, is ethical?
Well, if eating animals is ethical, then that might be ethical as long as nobody suffers.
Yeah, I can see it being ethical, but there also needs to be a concurrent effort to minimize suffering.
Absolutely, and gratuitous animal experimentation.
Right.
Or
people
do it. People do it all, very readily because it's a standard research tool, and they really ought to think about it a lot.
And I think I probably would oppose it for things like cosmetics.
Oh, for sure.
But not for things like medicine.
Yeah, I mean, it's regrettable.
Yes.
But animals die all the time, and
I'll
mostly
answer
because we eat them or because we run over them in our cars.
I'll answer my own question. It's a simple answer. No.
All right.
No, it's not acceptable. And humans die all the time too. So
That's
I think
true.
if we want to be less hypocritical about it, let's do experimentation on humans.
Well,
there is a place for that.
Yeah,
But I don't believe the total opposition to animal research would stop us from having medical progress. It might slow it down a little, but a lot of things go faster than they need to.
Having human rights and no longer doing what the Nazis did with experimenting on people in concentration camps also vastly slowed down medical progress. But I don't see that was a bad idea.
I have a feeling they didn't discover that much useful in that situation, but I could be wrong.
You're a bit wrong there. Actually, probably there was more medical progress during the 10 years of the Nazis than at any other period in history. Not saying it was a good thing. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It's just, progress always happens at a cost. And it's easy to say that we're better than the animals. That's hubris. I think a lot of that comes down to a combination of Cartesianism that basically states that animals are clockwork machines, and Judeo-Christian and to a certain extent Islamic religion that also gave priority to humans over animals. And if it was up to me, I'd say let's go back to the ancient pagan ways of doing things, where Pythagoras said he would rather die than eat an animal because for all he knew the animal was his deceased uncle, and he'd prefer to die rather than eat his deceased uncle.
Yeah, well, why should his reincarnated deceased uncle have a special place in the food chain?
Yeah, didn't he want to be close to his uncle?
Yeah, I mean, I understand he was a man of principle. We are talking about principles, and there's nothing wrong with his principles.
Well, I'm close to a lot of research that's being done, and I know they try to care for animals as well as they can, but the research simply couldn't proceed without the use of mostly white mice.
Yeah,
the research I know about.
Yeah,
and the research that is responsible for as a trivial example of current things, the research that has led to me still having my wife at home be somewhat cognitive was research that's done on white mice. Would I trade that? No.
Yeah. Well,
One thing
I think science is more ethical. They now have ethics review on proposed research.
And I know that's true at the universities that do research, because I'm connected with one of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that concern.
Mm-hmm. But I've seen mice being, as they call it, sacrificed in a biological laboratory, and I found it really just terrible.
One thing I think we have to guard against is assuming that animals have value insofar as we have an emotional reaction to them. So I see, for example, in my area, if somebody leaves a dog out in the cold overnight, it makes its front page headlines because of this cruelty to an animal. But that's because the dog is a pet, and so people have an emotional reaction to him, while no one blinks an eye at the factory farming, which is a much larger scale and much worse, and we're all implicated in it, or most of us are.
Yeah.
So that's well, we talked about sentimentality before, but that's a very specific definition of sentimentality, that it's your emotional reaction to something that gives it a value and not its nature. And that's a very dangerous thing, because it means that any being, any creature who's invisible, like the factory farmed animals, is not considered valuable. And that gets us, as a civilization, that gets us in terrible, terrible trouble.
You're absolutely right there. And in fact, it also comes down to always our anthropocentric ways of viewing things. So if something is viewed as cute, we have to save it. We have to save the pandas. That's great. We should save the pandas. But for things that are less visible and animals that aren't viewed as fuzzy and cute, much less effort is put into saving them. And for some of the things that are absolutely vital to the ecosystem, like insects, very few people really care about saving them when it's really important that they are saved. The other thing is, I think we should extend the golden rule to all living beings, and do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. If the white mice were running the world, would you want them to experiment on you? I say no. So again, there's a lot of people on this planet, rightly or wrongly, a lot of them would probably happily volunteer to be experimented on. And Sheikh al-Bashir, all of that stuff you mentioned in terms of research that's helping, I'm sure it would go much faster if they did the work on humans. So again, if we're going to do it, we should do it at least on a being that can consent to it, i.e. a human, and not be doing it on defenseless creatures.
Well, that's just not going to work.
No, and animals live most of their lives by accepting whatever's right there, whatever happens.
And they're not really very nice to each other sometimes.
Sometimes. But the thing about that dog left out is that you can imagine it as to be your dog. So it's the attachment that makes the connection. It's not necessarily the deep feeling of the sacredness of all living things.
Exactly. It's that's why I say it's sentimental. It's not from the deep heart. It's from the outer surface of the emotions.
Yeah.
And there should be as much concern about saving the pandas as there is about saving, say, fire ants. But there isn't going to be.
Well, no. It's like there's the not in my backyard phenomenon.
That's right.
Oh yeah, we need to keep our insect population protected, but I just don't want any of them flying around me. I mean, I'm really happy that all the bugs and the flies and everything have diminished around my house, but I'm alarmed that they're diminishing in the world.
Yes, I'm happy they're not buzzing in my ear, but it's really alarming what's happened to the insect population.
Yeah.
Truly alarming.
Yeah, this may do us in before global warming. You take a major block out of the food chain and things can go pretty wrong.
Right.
I think we need to bring back the dinosaurs. If with all this genetic modification and everything, let's hatch some dinosaurs so that like T-Rex, so that humans have a natural predator.
Yeah.
That would even things out a bit.
We do have a natural predator, and it's responsible for hundreds of millions of deaths over the world. It's the Anopheles mosquito.
Oh, well. Or is it the malaria creature?
Yes.
And we do have people looking into the possibility of resurrecting dinosaurs genetically. It doesn't get a lot of funding, I don't think, but there are people who think that would be a good thing to do. I don't think so. I think we need to realize that our primary natural predator is ourselves.
There you go.
I mean, the most dangerous thing to human beings is another human being, or certain other human beings.
On the chart of killers, humans killing humans are second only to the Anopheles mosquito. Most dangerous predator is the mosquito. The second is other humans.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to get busy and take first place.
It is, after all, about competition.
Right.
We haven't heard from Seda Zainab.
Oh.
I was just thinking that, it's not actually animal testing that goes on. Even human beings, they voluntarily sign up for trials in return for some incentive.
Yeah.
I think the difference here is that the animal kingdom doesn't have a free will to say no, but the human kingdom does.
And the animal frequently dies in the process.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly. But even like some clinical trials have gone so miserably wrong, with nobody's intent, of course, but it happens. And so, but if you look at how the animal kingdom keeps itself alive, is also within it. They depend on each other. They eat each other. If they were not to eat each other, then I don't know what would become of the world.
Well, we wouldn't have any research animals, for one thing.
Yeah, but we would also not have like an overpopulation of deers, for example, or things that we're coming across nowadays.
Deers are a great example, because I know from the territory and our property north of the city, deers are a real problem.
Yeah.
There's no new growth in the forests. The forests are dying. It's because the deers eat all the new growth, because there's an overpopulation of deers.
Yeah. So the problem is not the deer. The problem is lack of predators.
Yes, the problem is lack of predators.
I would add, though, that it's anthropocentric hubris to say that animals don't have free will. There are other ontological formulations about the chain of being, and not all of those put humans at the top. Who are we to know that we are the smartest? Maybe the dolphins are smarter than us. Heck,
or the octopuses.
I think the entire animal kingdom is smarter than us, because they are in complete surrender. They don't think, they don't have an illusion of this free will. So certainly they're more intelligent.
Well, they're maybe more enlightened.
Exactly.
That's what I think sometimes when I'm staring at a cat, is that,
You know that feeling.
Yeah, they just seem at peace.
Yeah, and well, they're not always at peace. I mean, they get cantankerous sometimes, but they don't worry. They don't think, that I can tell. I mean, they don't certainly think in language. They must think in some way, but they just kind of are what they are, and that's refreshing.
Always refreshing to be what you are.
But I think it's true that, I mean, the notion of free will has a lot of problems, and we maybe shouldn't ascribe it to ourselves either. I mean, if it's not as big a deal as we think it is, then maybe it's not important whether animals have it or not.
Well, it also gets that question gets one into very deep, unanswerable philosophical questions.
Well, it does, but it also gives you the opportunity to experience the world differently.
Yes.
It's like if you can suspend your belief in free will and just watch what's going on, you may be surprised.
And I think we do a lot of thinking on behalf of animals, just because we think we have to. But in reality, if we really want to feel what it is like to be one, let's be one for a day. Let's be Rocky for a day.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a rock.
Exactly. Yes.
There was a song with that title, but yeah.
What was the title?
Help, I'm a rock.
Oh.
In Zhuangzi, a conceited traveler sees a gardener in a trench drawing buckets of water with which he is irrigating his plot of vegetables. The traveler advises the gardener to invest in a machine that will do his work for him. The gardener laughs and says, "This I have heard from my teacher. The cunning have tools and show their cunning in business, and those who are cunning in business have cunning in their hearts. And those who have cunning in their hearts cannot remain pure and uncorrupted. And those who do not remain pure and uncorrupted are restless in spirit. And those who are restless in spirit are those in whom the Tao can find no dwelling place. It's not that I do not understand the tools of which you speak. It's just that I would be ashamed to use them." Can we understand the tools of the modern world without giving ourselves to them like the teacher in this parable?
Ideally.
Do you think there's room here for different vocations, different charisms, different spiritualities, different paths, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you know, it's not an absolute principle. It's a teaching. It's a lesson.
Yes.
And after all, the farmer may use a what's it called, a windlass, the thing, or wind. Maybe that's where the thing you know, raise and lower the bucket for the well, and then there's the bucket, both tools.
Yep.
So it's kind of hard not to use tools.
The point, of course, is to not be used by the tool.
Exactly.
And this guy wasn't up to it.
Which guy?
The guy in the field.
Oh, well.
Like the buckets of water. He was trapped by what he was doing. He couldn't take the other step to employ some mechanism to get better production without being consumed by it and carried off by it.
Well, he may have been content enough he didn't feel the need, but
that's not the point he made.
Yes, I know, but you could almost say the same thing about his teacher.
Yes, agreed.
So you know, the principle is not anywhere near the literal level, I don't think.
There's a hint in this story of a distinction from Wendell Berry, I think, that Farasha brought to my attention about where to draw the line in using tools, and Farasha will correct me. Farasha will correct me if I have this wrong, but he said as a rule of thumb, not as a principle, as a rule of thumb, you should use tools that you understand how they work, you know. So an axe, but not a computer. A tool that you can fix if it breaks because you understand how it works. And of course that differs according to the person using the tool. So
and the time and culture that you're living.
Right. But
yes,
ideally we should be the masters of the tools and not their victims.
Right.
So that's so that's the point. That might be
Yeah.
Wendell Berry's very point.
Yeah, that's the point he makes. You know, a pencil, not a computer. Horse-drawn, you know, plow or an old pickup truck that he could take apart and knew how to fix rather than some newfangled thing. Lewis Mumford makes a similar point when he said, we went wrong when we started adapting humans to machines rather than machines to humans.
Yeah.
Because up until slightly past the Renaissance, all of the machines that we had, all the tools we had, were adapted to us. An axe, a plow, etc. It was a scythe was adapted to the way we work. It was like an extension of our arm. Sheikh Isa also said this, you know, there is not just a quantitative, but a actual qualitative difference, a ontological difference in the transition between the hand loom and the mechanized loom. That one of them enhances our ability to create beautiful things, and the other one is diabolical.
Right. And a tool that doesn't need a human to work is already creepy.
It reminds
But-
me of the principle of medicine, that good medicine enhances the body's own ability and bad medicine subverts the body's abilities or replaces them, which is not to say that bad medicine is never useful or indicated.
Yeah. I
Or
mean,
that-
sometimes it's weighing the relative risks.
or that replacing those natural things is necessarily bad.
Sometimes
It-
the natural systems
Says-
work terribly.
Says he who has a titanium hip.
And I get along way better on my synthroid than I ever did when I had a thyroid. It was never good to me. The artificial hormones do a much better job.
Well, you can tweak the level to where you want it.
Yeah.
And if all you have is a thyroid to go on, you never know whether it's a thyroid that's being an asset or a liability.
How are we doing here?
Well,
It is it.
I don't know. I think we covered this one enough.
All right. Well enough.
All right. In another quote from Zhuangzi, the spirit of the clouds asked the whirlpool why everything upon the earth has ended up in such a disordered state. The whirlpool answers that the order of the world is shattered, that the conditions of life are thrown into confusion, that the will of heaven is without effect, that the animals of the field are driven away, that birds screech in the night, that mildew rots the trees and the plants, that destruction overwhelms everything that crawls upon the earth. All that is the fault of government. Would you then say that anarchism is the best and most spiritually acceptable form of government, since it is a form without forms?
what does he mean by government? I know that Confucius, it was Lao Tzu, I think, wrote about when the ruler of the kingdom is out of balance, the whole kingdom is out of balance, and things like that. But I think of it in terms of, we were given the earth to have dominion over, which I take to mean take care of it.
Certainly, certainly.
Rather than suck everything you can out of it. So it's as much how we govern ourselves. But it would be interesting to know what that word government was translated from, because it probably isn't exactly the same as the way we use it.
I think the person you're referring to, Siddhi Taha, is actually Confucius, but
It was all right.
in early Taoism, and remember the Zhuangzi is over 2,000 years old. It predates Christianity.
Oh yeah.
In early Taoism, government of all forms was viewed as an evil. That for the Taoists, only organic connections are valuable. So a family is an organic connection. A tribe could be an organic connection. And of course, you can have bigger or smaller connections between various individuals or groups of people, but it should be organic connections. A government is an artificial thing, an artificial system. And whether you're talking about some Confucian kingdom or you're talking about what we have now, I think the Taoists would be highly critical of it.
Well, I'm sure they'd be critical of what we've got now.
I think that the main thing we hate about our government is when it gives precedence to the powerful, because the whole purpose of government is to protect the weak and the vulnerable against the powerful. So we're rightly scandalized and horrified when we see just the opposite going on with the government. And the fact that we're shocked is a good thing. It means that government does succeed in many ways, probably that we take for granted. It succeeds in protecting the vulnerable. And that's the problem with anarchy, is it doesn't protect the vulnerable against the powerful. As soon as it does, then you've got government, you've got people organized and taking control and grouping together.
People can self-organize, but that has its limits of scale, and the problem with government is its remoteness from the people.
Yeah, small is beautiful. It's
Yeah.
true, but technology makes small very difficult.
Yes, it does.
But Abby, you're right about there's nothing in anarchy that assures the protection of the weak.
Yes.
But you know, there are a couple different forms of anarchy, and I think the form that you are, you know, describing, Abby, it's more along the lines of a kind of libertarian anarchy, which, you know, I would be vehemently against. But there are other forms that may or may not actually be able to function. Probably now they couldn't, but that they have existed in the past in ancient tribal societies.
Yeah.
And, you know, one thing that you have to realize is that the more that you have a government there to help people, and granted, today we've dug ourselves into such a hole that we need the government to help us, but the more you have the government there to help you, the less people are inclined to help each other. True. And so even in personal experience, visiting certain poor remote tribal areas, people don't have their doors locked. People will help one another out without any sort of rules or laws or necessity to help one another out. But they do it because they have a vital, living, organic connection to the other people there.
Well, the kind of government I'd like to have, and we tried real hard at it, is a republic.
Yeah, but there is a problem when things get too large or too complex. And one of my complaints about the invention of the computer is that, you know, the world was pretty much at a kind of limit as to how big, you know, at least any one business or industry could get, because the overhead of handling the information needed to do more. You know, they were kind of at the limit. You don't have room for all those file folders, for instance. And the computer came along and removed that restraint. And I really think that at the time the computer came along, there was a natural limit, for instance, on how big companies could get and how, you know, how much damage things can do. But it made, you know, it just took the burden and said, oh, you can have you can save all the information you want, and there was no longer much overhead in it. So you know, once things get too large, you can't have a consensual form of government because you can't talk to everybody. And you could have something like a republic with layers, you know, levels of size and complexity going down to the, you know, the neighborhood block or the small tribe or something like that.
And everything needs to be handled at the lowest possible level.
Right.
That's what
Right.
you're describing is in Catholic social teaching. I've mentioned this before. It's called the principle of subsidiarity. Everybody's better off when things are handled at the lowest possible level of the hierarchy.
Yeah, that's true. But if you had a system where the decisions that needed to be made by government were passed down the chain to the smallest groups and had them vote, you know, a consensual vote, and pass that up the line, we'd probably have a lot less problems. I don't know how you'd manage that, but I think the extremes would be moderated.
I'm not sure consensus is the right answer, and hence the need for a republic.
Well, I mean, consensus doesn't work if you don't have a grand unifying principle among the people needing the consensus.
Right. True.
So.
Too often democracy degenerates into the consensus of a popularity contest.
Yeah.
So my personal view is we should have the aristocracy of the sun.
No. That's the problem with democracy.
Right. Exactly.
So that's why we need a republic.
Well, as long as we have elected officers, there's always the risk that it'll turn into a popularity rather than a principled contest.
Well, not if you run it properly.
Well, I'd like to think so, but
it's your friend the computer and popular media that have made it possible to be a true democracy where everybody has an opinion on every issue.
yeah.
And the first thing the politicians do in the morning is read the polls, and that's not supposed to be the point of how a republic operates.
Right. The polls are supposed to be feedback on whether or not you're doing a good job at the most. But,
but
I don't understand. If
right.
It's a popularity contest, why do we end up with these absolute clowns governing us?
Because
who elects these guys? Why are they popular?
That's because
they're
it's
popular.
become a popularity contest, and it's no longer about competency. It's about popularity.
Yeah, but why are they even popular? They're not attractive. They're not charismatic. I don't.
Well, once this fascination with celebrity and all of that came along, which the mass media helped, then it became more about performance than accomplishment. And I think that that opens the gates to a populist who will, in order to get a majority, appeal to the worst because it's the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, a demagogue.
And the ones that enjoy being stimulated like that, it's like anger being self-justifying. They like that excitement. They like that, responding to their amygdala.
Or sentimentality.
Yeah, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything practical, really. It becomes really about subjective feelings.
I have no faith in republics or democracies. I think we should have an aristocracy of the sun.
Yeah, we could.
So there are people that can see the gods and are in touch with the cosmos, and those people should rule us and the rest should serve.
Well, they're not necessarily knowledgeable enough about everything earthly, so that I think both the worldly and the spiritual need each other.
Yeah, and some of those people like certain gods more than other gods.
That's right. And they can't all be right after.
Yeah, they can if you look at it right way.
Yeah, of course they can. Of course, but I mean, people don't want to let it be that way.
Well, that's why the people serve, because they can't see the transcendent unity of the gods.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice ideal.
And ultimately, I think one of our problems is you expect a politician to know too much and do too much. You know what they should be? They should be a philosopher king. They should be good in, religion and philosophy and, politics.
Yeah.
But why do you need a politician or philosopher king to be good in anything else? So let the mathematicians deal with the mathematics.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's what the administrative state is for, if it's managed properly. Principles can come from the top, but the implementation requires expertise and has to be done by others.
Let's do another question, maybe the last one today. Let's see how long we can go. The last Zhuangzi quotation for today. Another Zhuangzi quotation. Banish wisdom, discard knowledge, and gangsters will stop. Fling away jade and destroy pearls, and petty thieves will cease. Burn tallies and break signets, and the people will revert to their uncouth integrity. Split measures and smash scales, and the people will not fight over quantities. Trample down all the institutions of the sages, and the people will begin to be fit for discussing Tao. Can we do more with less? Less wisdom, less money, less stuff.
Oh, he's got it right on the head. Problem is people have values. Let's get rid of those and we won't have any of these problems.
Well, he's not saying sages, he is saying institutions of sages, but I think he's, the point is that if you get rid of all those things that people are attached to, then they can talk honestly about things. But that work has to be done working with one's attachment, not with the things.
Well, right. You can destroy the money and people will still be wanting, if not the money, then something else that gives them what money gave them. But you are right, Talha, that when he said sages, he meant like some sort of organized priesthood, not the concept of a saintly figure.
Right. That's what it looks like.
Well,
we can do more with less. But go ahead, Steve.
I mean, here he is saying, you know, throw away the things of values and people won't want them. Split measures and smash scales. I mean, don't value anything, don't measure anything. Let's get rid of quantities. And then trample down the institution of sages. And people will, where was it, revert to their uncouth integrity.
Yeah. That's a nice expression.
We can do it with less wisdom, less money, less stuff. Well, wait a minute, that's not Zhang Su, is it?
It is.
No,
the last part's, I mean,
that's the question.
That's the question.
And we can do more with less.
Of course we can.
And a lot of wisdom is assumed wisdom. And I think you have to let some of that go little by little as you realize you don't know what you thought you knew.
Yeah, but he's not saying here do with less. He's saying get rid of all of the things that have value of any kind, and then it won't matter.
Yeah, I think he's talking about materialism.
Mostly, but it's sort of like looking at the conflict between some duality or polarity and say, well, if you got rid of one of the poles, you wouldn't have the problem.
Okay.
But, you know, it's true.
I think what he's saying is there are some people that are great, that are destined, even in the most corrupt times, to transcend attachments. But for the vast masses of humanity, they're subject to the whims of socialization. And so if you raise them in a materialistic society, they're going to become materialistic. But if you get rid of all that and you have a society that's based on simple, authentic, whole, pure, organic ways of living, that people are going to be closer to that good, pure way of life. You can't expect the vast masses of people to be socialized to materialism and give it up on their own accord. Some will, but the vast majority won't. But if you socialize them to be spiritual, some of them will turn to materialism, but the vast majority of them will stay spiritual. That's ultimately what he's saying, that sometimes, you know, you can't expect these things happen on their own. You have to give a helping hand.
What does it mean to socialize people to be spiritual?
I mean, think about it. The Middle Ages were socializing people into spirituality to a certain extent. I mean, you had way more wandering dervishes 1,000 years ago than you have today, because people were socialized into the study of the Quran and the Hadith and the saints and sages. And you know, when every young kid was memorizing the Quran and all of this, then you had more likelihood that someone's going to end up a Sufi mystic, rather than today being taught that the only things of value are money, material objects, and knowledge of math and science.
Well, I'm not sure you can give people any form that's intended to be beneficial without some people not looking past the pointing finger and getting attached to the form.
Yes, and then you get the culture of the Middle Ages, which included persecutions, witch burnings, inquisitions, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much the people would come up with that kind of thing on their own, but
probably not. But
it, at a certain level of scale, those things certainly become possible. Look at either the Aztecs or the Inca or both, that massive human sacrifice that apparently they were involved in. But apparently that comes at a certain scale of civilization and a kind of degeneration that goes along with it.
that would go along with it. Yes, very interesting. A
Yeah, I don't
scale
remember.
and a concomitant degeneration.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard that, but I did hear that somewhere, and it made perfect sense to me.
Makes sense to me.
So I think, a lot of things, the larger the scale of that which people live in, the greater can be the damage and the impact of evil.
All true.
And also of good, but too many unintended consequences when things get complex.
So I'll leave it up to you whether you wanted to round out this rather contentious set of questions this time with something that might be a little bit more fun and joyful, namely number 5.
Raindrops and roses and kittens and
Whiskers on kittens.
Yeah.
And anyway, the question was, what are your favorite things in life? Activities, objects, work of art, etc. What gives you joy?
First on the list, relationships.
Yeah, they're pretty important.
And a particular joy of mine is communication, which sort of involves relationships.
Right.
And then of course, driving gives me joy. We've talked about that.
Yes.
Of course, the thing about driving is it's something I can decide to do and put into my schedule and do it and enjoy it and then be done with it for a while.
Yeah.
But thoroughly enjoy it.
I missed my Alfa Romeo.
Ooh.
The thing I like about sports cars is the significance of the car is less. It gets smaller and smaller, and a larger percent of what's driving is you.
Yes, right. But let's hear from everybody else.
Well, I think we all mind traveling.
I know, traveling.
Traveling to places is mine. Yes.
I've also spoken about my favorite thing, which is the ocean. I also like the night sky.
Yeah.
And geometric stained glass.
Yeah.
It's my first experience with feeling like a real artist must feel, because I've had these geometric designs in my head for as long as I can remember. And I recently discovered that colored glass is a really great way to express them, put them together.
Yeah.
Are you doing colored glass?
Yes.
Any interesting patterns?
Well, yes, I'll send you pictures since you ask.
Okay.
Well, that kind of thing is something I love too. I don't think about it, but if I behold one, I'm really it really touches me. The great rose windows in cathedrals, for instance.
But what about you, CD? What do you do for joy? Joy.
Me?
What do you do? Yes.
I just like finding out about things. So I think most of my joy comes when I can say, oh, I think I understand now. But, relationships are important.
Yes.
I think, by the way, I got engaged in the debate with all of you on the first question. You can all tell that one of the things that gives me joy is animals, and also it's a source of joy, but as with all things that give us joy, it's a source of sadness. So not that long ago, I saw a park that I go to where they were running one of these massive lawnmowers, and it decapitated a rabbit, and I actually was physically unable to eat for the next 5 days.
That's a long time.
That's how much it affected me. I mean, people think that people with autism spectrum disorder, that they don't feel, but I just feel in different ways, and I tend to be hypersensitive to things that happen to the natural world and animals. So if I present myself sometimes in a combative way about those things, it's not meant to be an insult to any of you, but simply is me expressing my own things. And in general, I find love and joy in nature, in rocks, in trees, in the moon. Must be why I'm such a lunatic. But yeah. in the whole cosmos, if you look around, there's joy in everything. Sometimes I've been known even just to sit somewhere and try to observe things. Not necessarily something big, but like, what a marvel there is just like sitting and observing ants. There's a lot to learn there. So, I mean, books are great and all of that is great, and I love to write and everything, but there's nothing better than just observing the goings on of the natural world, for me at least.
Books in brooks and sermons in stone.
Exactly.
And I kind of think that that's a little bit of what Zhuangzi is saying too. You know, when you get back to the basics, the uncomplicatedness, then you can have some freedom and experience the Tao.
Have any of you read Hermann Hesse's novel Siddhartha?
Long time ago.
Long time ago, yeah.
I mean, it was a long time ago for me as well, but you know, the interesting thing there is it's his novelized portrayal of the life of the Buddha, but after trying all of the different forms of meditation, nothing works. And then he's sitting by the side of the river watching the water flow by, and it suddenly dawns on him, oh, this is what it is, and then gets enlightenment.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there are a lot of possibilities you have to exhaust before you get to the truth.
Right.